Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the second event of this year's Wednesdays at the Center series, hosted by the John Hope Franklin Center and the Duke University Center for International and Global Studies. Today's lecture is co-organized by the Duke Center for Latin American and Caribbean Studies and is titled Haiti and the Haitians. We are pleased to welcome Jean Casimir, a professor of humanities at the University of Haiti and a former Haitian ambassador to the US. We are also welcoming Deborah Jenson, professor of Romance Studies at Duke, and Walter Mignolo, the William Hane Wannamaker Distinguished Professor of Romance Studies at Duke. Professor Jenson will open with an introduction and will moderate the following Q&A. Professor Mignolo will offer a commentary at the end of the event. Please remember to keep your microphone muted and to submit questions and comments in the chat. Please let us welcome Professor Deborah Jenson.
Hi, welcome everyone. It's such a pleasure to see these names and to know that we are together to welcome Dr. Jean Casimir, who, as you know, is a distinguished author, diplomat, and professor, who has also been the most humorous, insightful, and inspiring of friends to many of us here at Duke and in Caribbean studies or political sociology fields writ large, and whose work manages to become more relevant every day. Trained as a sociologist and anthropologist in Mexico, Jean has combined teaching and research with work for the UN and served as the ambassador of Haiti to the US from 1991 to 1996. He is a dedicated teacher at the Faculty of Human Sciences at the State University of Haiti, but his teaching roles have also been global. He obtained his professorship at the National Autonomous University of Mexico and has been a visiting professor at Stanford, at the University of the West Indies, Mona, and as a Mellon visiting professor here at Duke, as organized through our very own Center for Latin American and Caribbean Studies. He received the Jean Price-Mars Award in 2013 at the Faculty of Ethnology at the University of Haiti and the 2016 Haitian Studies Award for Excellence. Since the 1980s, his works written in Spanish, French, and Haitian Creole and English, including La Cultura Oprimida, The Caribbean, One and Indivisible, and Haiti Thomas, Haiti Chéri, have deeply influenced currents of decolonial theorization, particularly through his innovative and well-known concept of the counterplantation. This most recent book, The Haitians, A Decolonial History, translated by Laurent Dubois, with a foreword by Walter Mignolo, promises to reach ever more extensive audiences. In this book, Jean invites readers to, quote, place Haitians at the center of their thinking and to recognize the role of external influences without getting distracted by their logic and the norms derived from that logic. The focus here is on the logic and norms of the behavior of Haitians themselves. End of quote. You can find online a book club for the Haitians, including the next event this Friday from 2 to 4 p.m. and a whole fall semester of events. A word on logistics. After the lecture, as you've heard, Walter Mignolo will comment. Subsequently, we will invite you all to ask questions by presenting them in the chat. And please do keep your questions as brief and succinct as possible to allow for the maximum range of participants. I apologize in advance if we don't get to all of your questions. And now please join me in welcoming Professor Jean Casimir.
I thank you very much, and thank you, Deborah, for those wonderful words. I must thank the center, I thank Natalie, I thank Miguel, and the whole staff, and certainly I do thank Walter for this opportunity. It's, well, you know, it's really for me very, very, very important, this possibility of telling you more or less about what is in fact the work of my life. You see, the book offers a decolonial reading of the history of the Haitians. It is written first and foremost with the country's academic community in mind. That is to say, those who already know its history and have lived enough, had lived through it all their life. It invites them to consider a theory of its history, an attempt to find the reason of its eventual non-development. I'm pursuing a question that I have been asking myself since my bachelor's degree's thesis.
Hello.
This thesis is entitled The Republic of Haiti, Essay of Sociological Interpretation. As the first independent country among the colonies of exploitation, why does Haiti remain so poor? I'm still looking for the logic of the history that the Haitian built from. I'm still looking for its principle. Hence, the total history of the Haitians is my object of study. The period I observed most closely has a beginning and an end, but quite imprecise, and I certainly do not focus on its chronology. I may give the impression of a continual return to a beginning I cannot do without. It so happens that Haitians hardly had an elite emerging from their midst. Profiteers were superimposed on them from 1492 to 1804. Then a tiny oligarchy of Black Jacobins emerged from the early negotiation with the invaders a decade before independence. It was immediately sidestepped by the United States invasion in 1915. The chronology of the facts marking the trajectory we have designed is not yet established. To follow me, one must keep in mind that from the day of its discovery, 1492, Haiti has never been governed by authorities who spoke a language that its people understood, appreciated, and even less used to negotiate or challenge their self-appointed commander. The book, therefore, claims to locate itself outside the sequence of facts listed by the history of the colonial powers or by their surrogates. It is not easy to read, and only thinkers of the stature of Laurent Dubois or Walter Mignolo, Deborah, and a center of high knowledge with the sophistication of the University of North Carolina have been interested in making it accessible in the United States to a wider audience. This, far from alleviating the difficulties of its reading, puts them on the lap of the academic sector, which dedicates itself to historical studies, and of the promoters of what the international community advocate as development. To read this history, I choose a perspective among other possible ones. Those who believe in a linear evolution of humanity towards its well-being will feel uncomfortable with such an approach, which purposely offers an unfinished product. With each discovery of new historical facts, I must start again and reinterpret previous proposals. Let me give you two examples. Napoleon sent Poles to Saint-Domingue. They rebelled and joined the Haitian Revolution. These soldiers settled in the country and procreated mestizos. For the entire population, these mestizos were not mulattoes, as the imperial languages would want. They were reds, and even called rouge, which is a term of endearment. So, a study dedicated to dig out the history of the Haitian for their own use cannot make of skin color and of the trajectory of the select class, the mulattoes, the backbone of the history they constructed. Certainly, color prejudice and the select class operated at the level of supposedly world history. But this history describes the evolution of a small minority of Westerners who imagine themselves to be the universe, or at least the finest flower of the universe. It ignores the torments of the large masses of oppressed people and what it cost them to survive despite Western development. The second example has even more implication for my endeavor. Latin imperial languages define as Bosal people from Africa introduced in the colonies. Those first migrants have always been the majority of the colonial population. My doctoral dissertation, The Oppressed Culture, presented at the University of Mexico, was developed around this concept. Then one day, I realized that the Loa, the saints or gods of voodoo, could have been seen as Bosal. Their behavior could have been seen a behavior of a Bosal. I wonder how tutelary entities could be conceived as wild, backward, stupid, and uncivilized. The point was that the word Bosal means something different in Haitian vernacular. There, a Bosal is simply a person who does not know ceremonial and has no manners. So, I revisit the constant opposition of Bosals to Creole when addressing Haitians and not Latino Americans. Gradually, it befell upon me that most categories we used to refer to the component of our society contradict the description offered by the colonizing country. Negro, white, mulatto, Africa Guinea, slave Africans cultivators, maroons, inhabitants, God, saint, dead, loi or law, personal pronouns, he, she, us and you, family, religion, spirituality, and so on and so forth. Most important of all, the word essential to understand modernity from 1492 to our present days, the word slave is not used in Creole language as we have never seen them around us. This initial popular epistemic disobedience called for a whole new glossary to write a history of the Haitians addressed to them, except for those working in the police forces or related institutions, and only why they want to earn their daily bread. The population never conceived of itself as an aggregate of slaves. Its very existence implied a set of knowledge distinct from the metropolitan proposition. So I revisited everything from the discovery by Christopher Columbus to the landing of the United States Marine Corps. It is not that I did not progress in my studies and that I kept repeating myself. I'm advancing in the apprehension of the non-development of Haiti, of the Haitians. I was realizing that the rejection of development I conceived by colonial modernity had been the springboard of the behavior of my ancestors since the beginning of the colony. The Creole language, the Haitian Creole language, transformed itself while being constituted into a stop valve of colonialism. Its mastery became essential for social studies aiming at empowering the Haitians and not their self-appointed masters. This finding returned me to the drawing board again. I needed to review how did the vernacular language arose to this key position. What role did the Petit Blanc, its initiators, played in the colony? Where do they come from? Why were they chased out? Why were they chased from modernizing Europe? What were the impacts of the war of the religion's war, of the discrimination they suffered at home? Then, as indentured servants and precursors of the enslaved, how did they interface with the variety of deportees from Africa? We know that their solidarity on the plantations spilled over to the Maroon societies they integrated together from the beginning of their struggle. The production of a common vernacular language evidenced, therefore, the inescapable principle of life and survival of the oppressed. The tout moun se moun, everybody is a person, is a value created here in the struggle of the workforce during its daily practices, during its relentless search for happiness, however momentous were the surrounding dangers. This central value of the Haitian culture is common to all oppressed of the colony, the workers of the plantation squads, the servants in the cities, the so-called bandits, and the Maroons settlers in the Doko, in the bush societies, as well as the emancipated. The standardization of the vernacular speech and the intercomprehension of its different varieties went hand in hand with its intronization as the main marker of belonging to a single community of oppressed. I could then discard a hypothetical modern nation building. The Haitian could never conclude this kind of nation because it is contradictory to their daily practices. And I mapped the birth of the nation from the structuring of day-to-day living of the oppressed. What else is needed to establish that this was a sovereign act, just as the classic defined sovereignty? Who is the sovereign in Haiti? The state or the nation? If the state remains a fake mime of metropolitan France or of some other imperial entity. Meanwhile, the nation pursues its course, notwithstanding its poverty, notwithstanding the shortcomings of its daily life, notwithstanding the calumnies and arrogance of the colonial powers. The nation experienced in its day-to-day living the impossibility to destroy the house of the planter with the instrument he used to build and to protect that house. Being aware of the efficacy of its subjugation, it had to locate its own formation and preservation beyond its liberation from the embraces of modernity. The Haitian nation was not a colonized entity that liberated itself. Modernity did not invade a nation who then severed its links with it. This nation emerged in the process of rejecting colonialism. the viability of its refusal of enslavement, the viability of its own existence implied the defeat of colonialism. The Haitian, as well as other Caribbean nations, were born together with modernity. They are contemporaneous, concomitant. They were born together. They exist because they do not celebrate the profiteers that breastfed themselves with their blood. Therefore, social bonds that united the nation were woven as it opposed the policies formulated by the bourgeoisie exploiting its own proletariat. Now the Haitian, having had the opportunity and the means to put an end to their subjugation when the modern colonial state were preparing to evolve toward global imperialism, they had not had to negotiate their well-being with the metropolitan countries, and they do not seem to have learned to do that afterwards. They set up their own stateless federation of self-sufficient communities responsible for the well-being of villagers. In so doing, they disregarded the directive of central bureaucracies too close to the international community. As a result, the insularity of 19th century governments was reinforced by the enmity of the international community, while rural populations tended to ignore them. The population quintupled its effective, living its life as moun en dehors or habitant. These concepts are particularly relevant. They belong to vernacular language spoken by everyone in Haiti. In French and other imperial languages, rural populations are mostly peasants. But in Haiti, they are conceived as habitants, in English settlers, who perceive themselves, mind you, as foreigners, meaning as moun en dehors. I mean, those who leave the country perceive themselves as outside of the political structure. They are perfectly aware that they live outside of the values and norms of the public administration, which does not preclude their manipulation of these norms and values for all intent and purposes. During the 19th century, the rural population achieved food sovereignty and structured its village society in such a way to protect the lives of those who integrated it. These communities took care of their members, ensured their joie de vivre despite the real precariousness of their existence. With the passage of time, they infiltrated traditional oligarchies and was about to absorb them when, for internal reasons, the United States occupied the country and turned its public administration into an appendage of its power structure. The American occupation undertook the destruction of the autonomous village economy. They set up an outward-oriented political system under the sponsorship of an imported and superimposed new oligarchy that became known as the MRE, the most repugnant elite. Racism, specific to the Euro-American world, was reintroduced in the urban society. The arrival of the US Marines set in motion the decline of the moun en dehors and of their life form, while the urban political class, as well as religious, judicial, educational, and mass communication institutions became the enthusiastic intermediaries between the occupying forces and the habitants. Extrapolating these ideas to address today's quandary, I would point out that the effort of a nation of moun en dehors, of foreigners, imagine a nation of foreigners, to freely express themselves will not stop. Their autonomous attempts at self-expression have so far been systematically defeated by efficient policies of the United States faithfully assisted from the Second World War onwards by France and Canada. Today, the so-called friends of Haiti are assisting, including CARICOM and the OAS. The MRE, the most repugnant elite, unable to transform their traditional selections of political authorities into apparent elections, are presently confronted with the rise of insecurity in Haiti. And we also are confronted with that tremendous problem. But no one can explain how the poorest people of the continent, living in its worst imaginable ghettos, can circulate with an arsenal of weapons of war beyond the reach of the local police forces. Haiti does not fabricate weapons. I do not understand how effective worldwide intelligence communities are at a loss to put an end at the traffic they claim to be illegal. Haitians are at the mercy of the suppliers of weapons to persons who can barely afford their daily meals. They will never be powerful enough to undertake the structural changes that can support their sense of equality and a lifestyle that suits them. If they do not deviate from their goals, I am convinced they will eventually occupy the public sphere. Meanwhile, they may think of knocking at the doors of the oppressed groups that are budding in the rich countries. By participating in their struggles to express their political will and sovereignty, their alliance may lead to common strategies for exiting the actual global exploitative conditions. Haiti will safeguard its sovereignty in concern with the global south, or it will perish gradually. I thank you.
Thank you so much. And now we're moving on to the commentary by Walter Mignolo.
Well, thank you very much for this invitation and the possibility of continuing a long conversation with Jean Casimir that started about, 10, 15 years ago. So my comments, I will read you a few sentences from Jean Casimir book with two purposes. One, mainly for the graduate students or future graduate students that may be in the audience. And second, because the title of Decolonial History is not just a modifier, an adjective of history, but it means what it says. So what Jean Casimir did in this 20 minutes was to show you not just what he said, but the processes of arriving at what he said. So my comments, my reading of some of his sentences is about the saying and how in the saying reveals the politics of decolonial investigation. So I will share this. I am the child of a collective fighters, not of the vanquished. I have chosen to venerate them to honor these captives reduced to slavery, and those who emancipated in thanks of their military service to colonialism. I do so despite their errors and their occasional failures. I think to understand that is very important to understand also the distinction Casimir made between the state and the nation. So the revolution, Casimir changes the term of the conversation, not just the content in the way he just explained. So he talks a lot about the power and beauty of the sovereign people and kind of made a distinction between the nation state and the communal Laku. So the true Haitian revolution was not in the state, which is very important, of course, but the true revolution is the formation of the communal Laku. In relation to that, Casimir said, my position of strength comes from observing the outside world through Haitian eyes. When I do the opposite, I place myself in a position of inferiority by accepting the definition put in place by the gaze of another. So it's not the principle of history as a discipline or historiography that moves Casimir investigation, but is the kind of the existential reality of being Haitian. And he used his disciplinary training in sociology and history. He used the discipline to kind of advance his own politic of decolonial investigation. If readers, said Casimir, if readers ask what I have learned from writing this book that I now offer to them, my answer is that above all, in how I learn, in how I live my personal life, which I just underscore. It's not the discipline, but the discipline is being used for kind of a decolonial purposes, for living decolonially and seeing the world decolonially. I no longer see my ancestors as former slaves, as he explained. I don't even think of them as a dominated class. Their misery is only the most superficial aspect of their reality. It is reality that colonialists prefer to emphasize, along with those among them who oppose the cruelty of some colonies, but do not ultimately reject coloniality itself. So that distinction between colonialism and coloniality is crucial in the structure of the argument. Having finished this book, said Casimir, I have come to realize, sorry for the typo, to realize that my ancestors as individual and as a group never stopped resisting slavery and domination. I am the child of a collective of fighters, not of the vanquished. So the writing of this book is not just to report, to interpret history, but to continue the fight that his ancestor initiated many years ago. So that is all I have to say, and I will leave more time for conversation. So thank you again.
All right, and I think that Miguel Rojas Sotelo will be leading us off with his question. He writes, thank you, Professor Casimir, that was powerful. Then a nation state does not mean a sovereign one. How do autonomous sovereign peoples look today in Haiti? Is that even possible under the current power struggles between the oligarchs and local global organized crime gangs? Are the latter reshaping the hierarchies there? On the other side, is global humanitarianism a new form of coloniality?
You expect me to answer one by one? Okay. Sovereign people has always been confronted with this kind of power structure. They are not really able to change. I mean by that, this change is not a day-to-day, short-term, immediate. It does not give immediate results. We are so fragile, so small, so vulnerable that our first reaction is to sidestep the exploitation, first reaction. And we are going to manipulate exploitation to protect our way of living. That is one aspect. Another aspect that is very important is that given the fact that we are not properly organized like a modern country. Given this fact, we actually have ways of fighting that are not codified. When, for instance, the enslaved were fighting French colonialism, when the rural Haitians were fighting US imperialism in 1915, in both cases, those fighters were called bandits. They were called maroon, they were called savage, they were really outcasts. Indeed, they have done a series of things that are reprobable, that you could negatively appreciate. No, the maroons, the cacos, Charlemagne Imperial is not a saint, no. And today you have a set of bandits, no. But as the bandits themselves said, no, we are poor people, the one who are suffering are poor people, and the one who give us the weapons are not poor people. So at some point in time, something will happen. Why? Because we do not have really trade unions, parties, or, well, we have a set of particles, not political parties, no? We do not have the instrument of protest and of change that you find in a Western system. So you do not know what's going on. Living in Haiti is dangerous today because you have to watch out if you're not going to be killed. You have to, well, it's not that much. Living in Port-au-Prince, living in certain areas. Like New York, like Washington, you do know there are neighborhoods you're not supposed to be there because it is dangerous. Only the person in the neighborhood will feel at ease. You don't go there. If you go there, you're endangering your existence. Okay. But this group of protesters are reaching you because they are opposing, they are fighting, and their vision of the outside world is not to be trusted, let's put it that way. So at some time you may read on the paper that Jean Casimir was killed down the street because he was in the wrong place. No, indeed we have problem. No? So now, this reshaping of the society is slow. It cannot move rapidly. Let me give you an example. As I told you, Haiti has never been governed by a language that the people understand. When I was a kid, no, I've never heard spoken Creole in the radio or the TV, or Creole was not to be spoken among people who went to school. So we don't hear Creole. Under Duvalier's son, they introduced changes and they try to write officially to have an official orthography of Creole. In 1986, Creole started entering in the media. Today, you cannot find a media speaking only French. All the media is speaking Creole, meaning by that, the people, the habitants, the moun en dehors, their way of thinking is occupying the public sphere, the spoken public, the public sphere parlé, spoken. And you don't find that yet in the written press, but it's coming, it will come, because the written press cannot stay outside. You know what I mean? But you cannot force it to do it from one day to another. It is coming. The point is that we must understand in this fight between two societies, because they are really two societies, the modern international concern and the local society that is basically structured around total and full equality of its members. No, those two societies are negotiating slowly, but not through existing non-codified, organized, institutionalized systems.
Okay, I'm going to move ahead to a question by Mimi Scheller. is the counterplantation in its original aspects as an agricultural form of struggle still relevant today in the face of climate emergency? Are food sovereignty, collective landholding, and radical agronomy still relevant aims for the Haitian people to challenge coloniality?
Yes, Mimi. Hi, Mimi. It's indeed so. It is indeed relevant, but it is a fight. How can we stop those who engineered, for instance, agricultural engineering? You know, it's not exactly the... Indeed, the only possibility for Haiti to organize itself is to work toward food sovereignty. But working toward food sovereignty has to face somebody like Bill Clinton, who said in the Congress, I destroyed the rice production of Haiti by allowing selling in Haiti subvention rice from the US. You see what I mean? So the poor peasant of L'Artibonite, no, who used to feed the whole country with its rice, who can even export rice, now has a rice that is too expensive and become a luxury product because US rice is selling in Haiti freely. So the point is to obtain a protection for the local production, to increase the productivity of the local production, you need at some point in time to have an alliance with the outer groups, the groups that are more politically instrumentalized in the developed countries to assist you to do this job. In Haiti, given the outward orientation of our agriculture, our whole system, you will have, for instance, most of our intellectuals working nearly to develop plantation. In fact, most of the policies of Haiti, go toward plantation economy and not toward development of local market. Now, after this big problem we had with the earthquake, the earthquake, from the countryside, they said, we do not need food. We have too much food. We cannot get them out to the market. So send other assistance, for instance, medicine or whatever, alcohol, soap, etc., etc. Not food, because we have enough food. But therefore, you need to have a redirection, first of all, of our local economy, of our counter-plantation system. You need to have enough people from the middle classes and from the academic world to work on using that. And we have the possibility of reorganizing really our counter-plantation system to occupy and to create our own agricultural sovereignty. But this cannot be done, I don't think, without the assistance of resisting groups outside of the country who are, for instance, the diaspora is a good example. They can make pressure, they can lobby for protection, and so we can develop our local agriculture. If we do not do that, the existence of migrants from Haiti, all over the place, from Chile to Canada, will continue, full stop. So the only possibility is to go towards some form of local development. Now, this must be linked not with the strengthening of the state centralized bureaucracy state in Port-au-Prince. This must be linked with the communal, the municipal authorities, the authority that the people see close, that the people close to them, that the people control, that the people can make pressure on. While, for instance, anybody who is to be elected to national position will find money from the outside world to assist them, etc., etc., etc. So, Mimi, I don't know if I answer your question properly, but what I'm trying to say is that what you said is still relevant, but we have to fight to protect it. And for the time being, we do not have they were withheld to do so, either because our academic community, most of them are looking in the wrong direction, or because we do not have the resources to do it, those who are trying to really approach it in another direction.
Rodrigo Baluma has a couple of questions that are very rich. He asks about the existence of Laku structures in other American and Caribbean contexts, such as the Terreiros in Brazil and Conacos in Cuba and the Dominican Republic. But in particular, he focuses in on an important term in your current book, malheureux, translated as suffering, and asks you if you would speak to the importance of that term.
The Laku is all over the Caribbean. And this is an institution that we should look at. For instance, there is that wonderful piece of work, rather old, of a Broadburn on the Laku in Jamaica. She surveyed, if I remember well, some 9 types of Lakus in Kingston. Now you have yard, you have, they call them yard, no? And the same word actually. It existed also in Africa. Because I think in Nigeria, I read about that. So the Laku is a kind of organization, no, but it is not, up to now, it's basically rural. Nonetheless, it reproduces itself outside of Haiti, and you have in New York kind of Laku. We must study that. We have this sort of structure, this sort of reciprocity, this sort of self-help, this, you see, the Laku is some kind of a reconstruction of the clan, of the tribe, of the family, but the extended family. And you are supposed to give assistance to the extended family without any necessarily exchange, monetary exchange, certainly not. So the Laku structure exists not only in Haiti, not only in the countryside, you find it in urban Haiti. It is the same as the Conocos, as the Terreiros, as the etc. You find it all over. It is the way the oppressed people, particularly where you have had enslavement, no, find to protect themselves and to assist themselves each other. Now, malheureux, that is a really important concept because it implies that my situation of misery or poverty is something that happened to me. Nothing that I did deserve that. Not only that, nothing that I do can take me out of that malheureux. So if I get out of that situation is by accident, as if I get into it is also by accident. The concept of malheureux is very important because when our friends, particularly from the left, are thinking in terms of proletariat, in terms of, they have an idea of a group, a bourgeoisie, a proletariat that fought together with the bourgeoisie. They have a set of similar hypothesis, similar history of fight against the nobility, against the king, etc., etc. So they have similar concept. So they can fight one with each other because they have differences in their way of seeing their future. The bourgeois on one side, the proletariat on the other side. In our case, there is no way you will find a common denominator between the planter and the enslaved. You see what I mean? So there is no way the enslaved will not consider himself as a malheureux. I mean, by that, somebody who happened to be enslaved. You see what I mean? And that somebody who happened to be enslaved cannot stop being enslaved because even when he or she is emancipated, no, this is still a form of enslavement because to be emancipated means to respect the basic position of the planter. You said, I mean, to accept that the planter had the right to enslave you. because this is a very difficult problem to explain, particularly in English, because liberté is not liberation. You know what I mean? Freedom, I don't know how to say that in English. You know, but in French, you can be freed, you can be libéré. That liberation is not liberté. That liberation of the emancipated implies that the emancipated still respect the architecture of the system. Liberté, you can create your own architecture. You do not have to respect that. You see what I mean? So this is why the concept of malgré operates in Haiti, operate among our people, because we are not born together out of the same history that created the opposite dominant class.
I'm going to cobble on a question to Rodrigo's question about the Laku. The recent book Autochthonies by Miriam Chancy develops the concept of Laku consciousness. And I wondered if what you think of relating that to indigenous knowledge movements and to the idea of cognitive justice. Can we actually look at structures of consciousness, at epistemological diversification around the Laku?
Actually, I haven't yet read the book of Miriam, but that's exactly what I mean when I mean Laku consciousness. You know, I mean, there is, this is what is beyond the actual physical existence of the Laku. This is what you find in New York. This is what you find all over in Port-au-Prince, etc., etc. Not only that, this Laku consciousness, I have observed it among Syro-Lebanese who immigrated to Haiti and are Haitians for 1 or 2 generations. They discuss in terms of Laku. You said, I mean, even though they have never lived in no, well, the person I'm talking about have not lived in a compound and do not have, they only have probably 2 generations in Haiti. Nonetheless, they are so well adapted and integrated to the Haitian society. Their way of interfacing and of exchanging things is reveal a Laku consciousness.
And then one of your former students, Mr. Rouet Jean-Baptiste, asks, what analyses would you make about the current situation in Haiti right now and about the Haitian migrants who are now facing brutality in Texas? Can we consider these as direct consequences of that system, which since the beginning has forced the majority of the population to live in the mountains and to consider themselves as not belonging to Haiti?
It's not a matter of not belonging to Haiti. To Haiti? I mean, to the Republic of Haiti or to Haiti, to the Haitians community? In any event, it is a direct consequence of what is going on. It's a direct consequence of the marginalization of the people, the impossibility of the people to express their political will, and the blockage of the people on all fronts. I mean, you can only express your political will if you participate in the dominant system. You know what I mean? All the dominant system from the beginning is rejected. You said, I mean, because I would not exist if it were for the dominant system. You see, take an example. Certain total plantation society, the enslaved had to negotiate within the system. They had to learn how to speak with the planter. And in fact, some countries have no Creole at all, for instance, Barbados. You said, I mean, while you have a full-fledged and developed language outside of the dominant language. So you have other concepts, you have other way of seeing society. You said, I mean, and you can maintain yourself in this other way and reproduce yourself there. So therefore, it is the totality of your, Barbados is a very complex situation, and I mentioned that en passant, and I would not dare to go any further from what I just said. But the case of Haiti is that you are forced to fight en bloc. You said, I mean, you do not have bridges where you can cross and discuss with them. So when things goes bad in Haiti, as Dio Beckford put it, migration is one of your weapons. You leave the country to go work somewhere else, and you send form and money and courage and help to those who are in the country to maintain the Laku ongoing. You see what I mean? So you move away, you go in another system, you're trying to manipulate the other system to send resources to maintain you Laku. Okay. Now, when, for instance, you have an oligarchy which is supported basically, I was going to say exclusively, by outside forces. If these outside forces were the state, you can still find a way to talk to them. But if they are corporation, group of bandits, group of, I don't know who they are. I mean, the intelligence community would know. You said, I mean, you do not have possibility of negotiating, so you keep trying to find a way out and find some resources everywhere. I mean, you are just lost in the global world. You go to Brazil, from Brazil to Chile, Brazil, Ecuador, and you keep moving, and you will come back again to the source of food. This is something that it's more complicated than that, but in any event, if I would say that what is happened now is happened because exactly you marginalize a few people, you give them no chance to produce for themselves and to manage their production.
Wonderful. This has been so rich. And in concluding, as we thank Professor Casimir, please remember that there is the book club on the Haitians. There is an event on Friday from 2 to 4. I'm going to quickly put that link in the chat. And so this conversation can continue to unfold as we all get to know this work better. So thank you to Clax, to the audience, to Dasha, and above all, of course, for his illuminating and challenging work, Professor Jean Casimir. Thank you.
Thank you. Merci.
Thank you. I would like to thank again Professor John Casimir, Deborah Jenson, and Walter Mignolo, and thank you to all the attendees who joined us today. Next week, Wednesdays at the Center continues with another very current discussion titled The Great Infrastructure Game: Why Asia, Europe, and America are competing to build in the developing world and what it means for the global climate. The conversation will feature Jackson Ewing, a Duke Associate Professor at the Sanford School of Public Policy, with an introduction by our director, Professor Giovanni Zanalda. Thank you again, and we hope to see you next Wednesday. Have a great day.